This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For January 22nd, 2021, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. Well, welcome back, everybody. It's time for another podcast adventure with the AV SuperFriends. My name's Chris Dector. I'm here with Justin, Mark, and Larry. We're missing a few SuperFriends today. We were missing a few last time, too. Life intrudes at times. We'll do the best we can. If any of you are diehard fans of Jamie and Rachel, you can skip this show. Also, please write in and tell us why you're diehard fans of Jamie and Rachel. They would love to hear it.
We are tracking that. We have a spreadsheet. So
yes, we're keeping track of how many fans we each have. Right now, Justin is in the lead.
Do I have zero if I'm in the lead?
You have one.
Yeah, we were all shocked by
Larry?
the data. We were surprised.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
So
Nice.
on today's show, and we've been kind of hashing this out for the last couple of minutes as we kind of plan how we want to approach this. We want to talk about staffing. So we're going to talk about walking staffs. We're going to talk about music staffs, fighting staff. Oh, wait, no, not
Staff
staff
infection. Yep.
Staff infections. Everyone went right there. No, we're going to talk about employees level, staffing employees and staffing levels at your institution, at your university. How many full-time and part-time staff? How many student staff should you have in your AV department? And then we're going to so we'll go around that. We have kind of a scenario we're going to talk through on that. And then afterwards, we're also going to look at some real-world, actual, no-fooling job listings from around the internet. A bunch of us grabbed these in the last couple of days because there's a lot of companies hiring right now.
Because we all have the internet.
And we're going to kind of look over those job listings. We've removed the appropriate names and locations to protect the innocent and guilty. And we're going to talk about those job listings and kind of read the tea leaves and determine what sort of position it really would be. Is this, is it something that sounds interesting and would be worth looking into? Or is this, one where someone's got some HR boilerplate, which is kind of going to poison the well immediately. So anyway, so let's talk about at staffing levels at our institutions and what we've seen through our AV careers. What's an appropriate level of full-time staff and part-time staff and staff you can borrow from other groups maybe as they help with different aspects of a project or an install or support. What about student staff? So I think what we'd like to do, so we're all kind of starting on the same page, is we're going to use a common scenario, and we're going to say we have a university of about 25,000 students. So it's a larger university, and that allows us to go a little more in depth on some of these different departments that might be there. So I do want to make sure we do touch on smaller schools as well. But for now, let's say we've got a university of about 25,000 students. We're looking at about 250 spaces, we've decided. About 40% of those spaces are departmental spaces, for whatever that means at your institution. There's maybe 5% of those spaces are what we consider unique, maybe multi-purpose or special event spaces. And then about 10 to 15% of those spaces are smaller conference rooms, collaboration spaces, huddle rooms, that sort of thing. So if I did my math correctly, those do add up to 100. I hope. I may have skipped something in there. But basically looking at a space or a layout like that. So with that sort of thing, if we say we have 250 total spaces that we support in some way, shape, or form, but only about 60% of those would be considered, general inventory or registrar controlled or general scheduled or however you refer to that. So 150 of the 250. What would an ideal AV department for that scenario look like?
And everybody's always going to ask right away, what about budget? We have the appropriate budget. Okay. We have the appropriate budget. Whatever that means, we have it.
One question on this. So does this university do their own projects? Are they integrator reliant?
Well, so yes. let's back up and we'll talk about all that. But I want to start with, so Larry, if you had 250 spaces, 25,000 students, and 150 that you support, like tier one right away, what's the staffing level look like? And then, yes, we do want to get into those larger aspects of workload and project workflow, because that definitely plays into all of that.
Okay. First, to get this out of the way, I'm a huge believer in students. And so my staffing level only works if I get a lot of students that I can use as well. I would probably have between 6 and 7 full-time, ideally, in that scenario. Full-time staff, but they would not all be of the same level. I'm not a big believer in everybody can do every job, which seems to be prevalent in a lot of the universities I've been to. In my opinion, I want guys who are really good at installing and fixing, and I want a career path for them to move to that if they so choose, they can get into designing and programming and project management and that kind of deal. So I'd probably have 2 to 3 of that staff who are in designing, programming, PMing roles. And then I'd have 3 to 4 that are focused on classroom support and installation. And I know that's not a lot for classroom support, but I rely heavily on students to do that, along with installation. I rely heavily on students to help with installs. You know, I used to have students who did all my programming on the campus for $10 an hour. It was pretty awesome. Like, there's a lot of the work that we do that we can invest a little bit in the student staff and get it off our plate. So that's probably where I would start, and then I would move from there.
So just real quick, you came up with a number of 6 to 7 pretty quickly. Is that based
That's
on?
about where I'm at.
Do you just have a rough number to say that if I have X number of spaces, I need Y number of people, and that just immediately comes to your mind, or what brings you to that 6 to 7 number? Or
I've been at several universities where we fall right in that level. And I've seen what works. I've also been to universities that were much smaller where we try to do everything with 1 to 2. And that gets overwhelming pretty quick. Mm-hmm. My biggest thing is I want redundancy at every position. And I prefer redundancy in an apprentice level almost, where I have my lead programmer, but I also have a secondary programmer. That when that lead programmer decides he wants to take a step, I already have somebody who's familiar, has the institutional knowledge, and is able to step in pretty quick. So mine focuses on having redundancy, but still being a little bit realistic of the amount of staff that I'm going to be allowed. So that's why that 2 to 3 in the upper, probably the system analyst 2, as they've been called in some places, just that programming, designing, commissioning role, and then a little bit heavier in the installing and boots on the ground roles.
Gotcha. So at my institution, we're not too far off from almost that same ratio, and I'll maybe talk about some of the nuance. For our core day-to-day staffing, right? I have a dedicated programmer who is kind of the lead programmer. And then we have 4 or 5 ESS type workers, equipment system specialists, that are really configuring hardware, day-to-day fixing and maintenance. And they also do deployment and build for new projects as well. That's the pool of staffing we'll use. I do have some other support desk kind of coordinator roles and IT specific staff members within the organization as well. And then we have a handful of directors in there as well. So as myself, my role a lot is in the design and kind of that piece of it. So I kind of take that role on and then utilize these other staff members to kind of deploy the projects and move them forward. So do a lot of blending. But like Larry, we do have a significant pool of students available to us, and that does fluctuate, but we have, between 10, 15 or so-ish students around, and they'll rotate. Their schedules are always different. And we are almost that exact scenario that you had mentioned, Chris, and as far as sizing, and that's about how we get it done. There's not a perfect ratio. We don't say for every room that we take on, we need to hire X amount of FTE. It just kind of, we're trying to balance quality of life and trying to keep our heads above water wherever we possibly can. I think everybody may have a different variant on that.
Hey, Mark, where would project management fall? Would that be with you or with someone else?
So I'm gonna use the term project management because I'm just going to. We don't do full-fledged project management. There is a project management wing, for lack of a better term, within our university IT program and kind of hierarchy. But what we do are little p projects, right? We call them like they are day-to-day small projects, one-offs, and even the capital project. It has a project manager, but that's not embedded within our staff. Myself and another assistant director, we kind of do project tracking and light project management because, again, we're not trying to become project managers in this. We just wear the hat just to keep things moving. If we need to bring in a full-on project manager, we do have access to those, but it's not something embedded day to day.
Interesting. So, regarding that pork rind university, I guess I'm pretty much with Larry. I might be a little bit on the low end. I might be at 5 full-time employees, and I see that as being, based on how WKU structured. So maybe a design engineer, project manager type person. You got to have a programmer and then an installer. So that's 3, and then 2 support staff with students. Currently,
Justin,
at
real quick, when you say
Yep,
installer, is installer different from a support tech? Is that a different person completely?
Yes. Okay. So, and this will kind of make things clear on how we're structured at Western. So right now, we have a manager over AVS, Audio Visual Services. And we've got, I'm looking at the org chart right here. So we have an operations group, which is day-to-day operations and ticketing. And then we have an engineering group. So anything the operations group can't solve, they send the ticket over to us, and then we solve it. Nonetheless, that's kind of how the dynamics work. So the operations group is really white glove service, though, with Zoom rooms and the old traditional, bridge to bridge type calls. They do all the scheduling. They set up all the classes. They kind of train on digital signage software. They're first response. So the student workers are actually sitting there on the phones waiting for phone calls to come in mainly. They don't do a whole lot of troubleshooting, although some of them can. So it just depends really on what level of service each university does. So for instance, something that we lack, and we know we lack, is the in-room classroom support. We've got, and this is where our numbers get really skewed. And I'm usually we have well over 600 classrooms, and we have well over 800 spaces of AV that we support. And so going back to our numbers currently, you have the AV operations manager. Then you have 5 AV support engineers or AV support specialists underneath him. And those are full-time employees. So, Josh Marble, he does a lot of the media sites stuff and troubleshooting that and doing other things that other people do, right? Digital signage support. We've got Ryan and Kayla. They kind of run the classrooms to figure out what's actually wrong because we don't have a remote system in place. So we're sending people to classrooms every time we get a call, and there's no remote support there. And the engineering group, that's more of a flat. We all in the engineering group report to the manager. So you've got myself, who's the only systems designer in the group. Then you have the project manager dedicated to AV, which is Todd. And then you have Brian, the programmer, and then Matt and Alex, who are the AV systems specialists. They're really the ones that are gluing everything together on site. They're installing, they're configuring, they're setting up the IP tables, etc. They'll bring me in for gain structure, various punch out things, commissioning things like that. But nonetheless, they're doing everything that I design in the room. Todd's a big help because he's on site coordinating contractors, looking at my drawings, making sure that the rough ends are there. So that's kind of how we work. And we are severely understaffed right now based on how many.
I got a question for you real
You said you're severely
quick.
understaffed, but you also rattled off about 27 different names.
Yeah, that was a pretty big list.
Well, it's only, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in engineering, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in support.
That's a lot.
One manager. And we have a shit ton of rooms. I mean, we really do, because there's not a department room and then a registrar room. Every room is like, when we get a call about it, everyone's the same priority.
Can you estimate shit ton for me? Give me a round number.
Exactly.
A ton plus shit. So a shit ton.
Larry, go ahead.
You have a separate support and a separate installation. How do you handle the ebb and flows? Because in the summer, your guys in the engineering side must be slammed. Do you?
And in support is slow. No, they sometimes help us install, but mostly, we have a cabling group too, right? So our cabling group's pulling our cable ahead of us, which is part of IT, not inside AV. So any cabling that happens on campus, one entity, about 3 people handle. So that takes a load off of the installers.
So it sounds like you guys are like a bunch of little integrator groups in a weird way.
Yes.
Like you're operating like little businesses within the university.
Correct. And there's pluses and minuses to that. People see us as a business and they're like, why are you guys charging all this money? It's like, well, because we don't have any money.
People in your staff.
You want a projector. It's not like we can just, it's not like we can just, shit a projector overnight. You got to buy it. Somebody has to buy it. Right. And we don't have the funds to buy things. So we're just operations, just people.
Justin, I'm glad you were able to kind of go through that, because it's I think a drastically different, as we've seen, I think a pattern here of things at WKU are just radically different than anything any of us have ever experienced, which is a very cool perspective to bring. Right or wrong, I don't know. It is different. So
I don't know if it's right or wrong. It works well. I just think that the way we do things, we either need more people or we need to implement better remote support over systems.
I don't think
one of the two
people, but
we need remote support.
So I would, it's interesting to hear how that breaks down, and we're immediately kind of going into, well, what about this or what about that? And I guess I'll bring the perspective of having seen 5 or 6 universities up close and in depth over the years. Everybody handles something different. So, I guess the question would be, can we determine a metric? Like Larry brought up the during installs, if does your support staff help out with installs and things? And I think in most cases that answer would be unequivocally yes, but it sounds like at WKU no, because they're doing something else, and that's fine. That's just an organizational change. If however we look at that and say, if I have a generic pool of technicians, whether they be support technicians, install technicians, whatever that might be, how many of those would you need for this fictional university of 250 spaces, 150 which are general scheduled and 100 are departmental? So, I mean, is there an easy way to break that down?
No, you have to define what you're doing, right? Because I don't know about you all, but we handle all technology in classrooms, meaning we're doing imaging for computers during the summer. That's a support group. So our support group actually came from academic technology, which they dissolved, who handled all the open labs and computers on campus. So we brought some of those people in when all of IT reorged, and now we are anointed. You are the in-classroom computer support people. So you're going to need more staffing if you handle computers versus if you don't, right? So it just depends on what you're doing. Some universities like Notre Dame put maybe one full-time person in a classroom all day long. That's a joke, but
that's not far off. Honestly, there are schools out there that have well over 150 students helping out. It's like, are you staffing every room? It's crazy.
Yeah. So if we did that, we would need to hire 500 people, right? I mean, you just can't. So it depends on what what's your level of service.
The classroom concierge.
Well, okay, so let's take an even farther step back and say, just for responding to general support requests, let's start there. Someone calls, and honestly, if they're teaching their class or they're in a meeting, they don't care who owns or who's responsible for the room. Something in this room is broke. I need someone to come unbroke it. How many people would you have on staff? And I'll throw this out to everybody. For your space, so we'll say I've got my 250 total spaces, 150 which are general, 100 we consider are departmental, but it doesn't matter depending on where that help request comes in, because they're going to call the wrong help desk anyway. the people in the medical school are not going to call the medical school help desk. They're going to call the general one, or they're going to, or the people in the law school are going to, because I teach in the business school, but I'm over in the law school building, and I'm going to call the business school help desk, and it becomes a big thing back and forth. Maybe that's where we start, though, is if you have X number of rooms that you need to support at any given time, is that a first step into the I need Y number of support staff for that? Is that the first place you start? Because I have 2 numbers in mind. I'm just curious if anyone else does.
Well, I know at our university, our technicians are not tier 1, right? They can be, but typically that's a student-run support desk. It's escalated to our technicians, which is the same pool of technicians that are deploying and configuring and doing all that stuff during the off season. We'll call it the summer or whatever it is nowadays. And so that's the same segment of 7-ish folks, and things will land in different skill set buckets as they're kind of triaged through and kind of handed off as students can. And sometimes students can handle it. They'll do it themselves. Oh, it's just this reset. We cycled the program or whatever it was, cycled some power, and it's off to the races. But if it comes in and this seems like it's a programming related issue, that's going to get escalated to the programmer. If it's going to be an audio issue, that's going to be escalated to my audio person. Or if it's going to be a camera or a video or a projector, that's going to go to general kind of video tech person. They're all that same pool, but their success is kind of built on the students kind of digesting and doing that triage on the front side. And there's one coordinator who is overseeing that whole piece as well.
So, Mark, you mentioned you had 10 to 15 students, and I know you and Don have a good crew of student employees there to help. How did you come up with a number of how many you need to have a full complement? Because I remember there are times when you don't have a full complement of students, but other times there are, and there's plenty around, and once they're trained up, they're really solid to get that out there. So how do you determine how many you need to do that tier 1 stuff?
We have one of those like really crazy dice with like 700 sides, and we just roll it, and whatever it comes up with.
Yeah, and see, this is my point, because it's interesting that you 3 think that we're overstaffed, where I think we're probably one of the severely understaffed universities out there right now.
I think
based upon what we are dealing with.
Yeah, and I think after we come back from break, after we finish this piece up, I want to dive in like specifically on what is it that you say you do here. And so, but
I have people skills.
Yeah, and so but to go back to your question, Chris, I think a lot of it came from the servicing side, right? We looked at all of our spaces, and we knew they had to be serviced at least weekly. So, and we have very narrow windows of time to get into those spaces. So what do we need as a staffing to kind of make it a digestible kind of work schedule for the students to be able to do that during their kind of sporadic work hours, or maybe 1 or 2 hours here, 1 or 2 hours there. And so it's flexible. It changes. It's not a hard set 10 to 15 number. That may change term to term. But a lot of it is around making sure we have bodies go into those classrooms on a weekly basis.
Out of that 10 to 15 students, how many are working at any given time? Like just as an example, I try to keep at least 2 to 3 students on the during the entire class time. That way, one person's working the intercom.
We try,
and we can send 2 students before we have to start pulling our full-time staff.
We're similar. Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where it's if we can, but we're at the mercy of their schedule. We can't tell them you must be here at this time. It's kind of we're giving them the opportunity to have some real life experience. But yeah, we're same boat. 3, 4 if we can. And sometimes we may have more. Sometimes we may have less, and we have to be more mindful of what we send students out to do.
So just real quick, so the numbers that I've used in the past, and again, it's based. So from the student standpoint, it's kind of easier. What I found is, and this was 15 plus years ago, but whatever, same thing. I want to assign students the same rooms, so they're going to have to get out to those rooms once a week and touch them. I know at University of Missouri, for example, we wanted somebody in there every day, but that was a very specific kind of desire of that institution. They were willing to pay for it to ensure that somebody touched every room every day, sort of thing. But most cases, if somebody touches a room once a week, then that's pretty decent. And what I found worked well for me was the maximum number of rooms that any particular student could be expected to kind of get to know, understand the quirks of, and make sure they get there on a routine basis. Because as you said, Mark, they've got classes. They're students first, employees second. Even though a lot of times that gets flipped in your mind, but the number I use is 25. So each student has 25 rooms. If I have 250 rooms, I need 10 students. That's the first place I start with metrics. Now you can start fudging those numbers immediately, but that's where I start. And then for full-time staff, I do the same thing based on those numbers. Now, of course, yes, we've discussed the full-time staff are doing they have different roles, or doing different tasks. So across the board, I add 50% to that number. So I say 35 to 40 rooms. So I take the total number of rooms I have, divide by 35 to 40. That's how many full-time staff I need. So for an institution of 250, that'd leave you with somewhere between 5 and 6 full-time staff and something like 8 to 10 students, which seems about right. And yes, there would be some specialization and some cross-training and some of that. But that's, I think, a good place to start. And that's a start of the conversation. But it does sound like we need to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and hammer on this a little bit more, because I don't want Mark's computer to explode.
There's a great new digital magazine from Higher Ed AV Media found at higheredav.com, and we do a special monthly show where we actually stay on topic. It's a show where we try to really focus on a single topic and break it down into AV SuperFriends style. That's AV SuperFriends on topic, found at avsuperfriends.com, higheredav.com, iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts from.
All right, welcome back. So we had just identified the perfect number of staff per space. And now that we've identified that perfect number, and you never have to deviate from that ever, no, I'm kidding. We want to dive in a little bit more on what these staff are doing. If you have a staff of 4 or 5, 6 full-time and a handful of students floating around, or if you have a larger staff of 7 to 10 to 12 to 15, or if you're like Justin and you have a staff of 478. But that includes a lot of different people from a lot of different departments who are in some way, shape, or form kind of touching AV projects, but that's not their entire role. So within that larger IT scope, what, are we considering the staff, the AV staff, is that strictly AV? Does that get into networking? Does that get into PC deployment? Does that get into straight help desk positions? How do we determine, the scope of a position within each department, and where, as AV becomes more and more IT every day? You could argue you need a network administrator on your AV team because we're doing so much AV over IP. And by the way, if anyone has a true straight up network admin on your AV team, let us know, because I'm curious about that. That is something we're going to start seeing in the next few years. I'm just curious who's doing it now.
I think we're leading. But we're moving that way.
What are these staff? What is the specialization of these staff, and are they? What's their role in the larger IT organization in the AV side of things?
Larry, kick us off. Dive in. I'm curious.
Well, my opinion on this has changed a lot since I've started in the higher ed world. When I started, I came from a commercial integrator where I was designing, and I kept the programming as part of my title just because I like programming. It's something I enjoy. And so I would never drop it from my business card. When I moved to higher ed, and I started seeing all the asset management and asset tracking and all the project management parts of the job that take so much time. And it probably takes so much time because I'm not really that good at it. It's just stuff I'd rather go design or go program a system. I have become aware of how valuable an internal project management for an AV team can be. Where I moved to, we actually have a guy on the team who is classified just like everybody else is, but he's really, really good at the project management side of it, and he has saved me so much time. And so as I think about this fictitious company or university, I want to keep a spot open for that project management. Now, they can also be responsible for managing the students, managing something that doesn't take all their time. But, I might keep a design engineer and programmer, 1 or 2 of those. But in that upper echelon of the group, I want to have a project management position there who just oversees the day-to-day aspects of our budgets, of the asset tracking, all these things that have to go on as a part of that AV Tier 2 group.
Yeah, so I'd say at our university, and looking at the fictitious one, I think that it's absolutely important. And in our current roles, the directors, right? We have a couple different silos of directors within our organization, but myself and Don, we are really overseeing that project management piece and the procurement, the tracking of budgets, and all that stuff. And so that kind of falls underneath our umbrella. But I think it is super important, and we're becoming more agile with that and being able to do it better. But at the same time, we recognize that we're probably not going to use all the industry best practices for that, because we're not all going to go off and get a PMP certificate of some sort and then all of a sudden dismantle all of our working culture to make it fit this one project management silo of workflow. So we kind of cherry pick the pieces we like that fit well into our culture in that, and it is really important. The more we adopt in that standardization and doing that, it has kind of been better as far as becoming efficient. Yeah, Chris is showing us a book. You all can't see it on the radio, but it is there. But
it's my PMBOK book.
Yeah,
it's great.
It's important, and I think more and more as the complexity of projects kind of come into light, and then you have lots of different trades overlapping and windows kind of closing in very narrow time scopes, it becomes even more important, right? But there's cost savings that we do realize by not having one person dedicated to that. I don't know if we're at that point where we would say, okay, we're going to justify an entire FTE within our own organization just for project management. It'd be cool if we were there. But I think, the hat is worn by some directors. And I think outside of that, looking at our common pool staff, they're great at it as well as far as helping us track that. And, having a solid 3 or 4 general technicians, I think, available to you that are very well trained up. I would say CTS or the like somewhere in there, or the ability to take a CTS rather soon and actually acquire that is kind of the skill set we're looking for. But we're not afraid to train them and get them up there, right? I think everybody should be able to bring in fresh people that want to learn in the industry, because I think the skill sets are great to acquire as you go through here. But that 3, 4, 5 guys that are or women or whoever you have that are hungry, that want to dive in there and actually learn and be a part of it, I think those are crucial to success. If you don't have a staff that want to go in and are not interested and intrigued by learning new things and being involved, then you're not setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, I mean, how much is that? Dealing with training. I mean, you got a training program that you formalized, or is that kind of just went to the wayside with everything else going on?
Training budgets have went to the wayside, but luckily a lot of the places are still offering free training. And so that is something we are pushing heavy here. And part of it is just making sure that our guys are in that developmental process so that when opportunities arise that we can do innovative things, I want to make sure that we're ready to do that.
Yeah, it's important to kind of let them think about that in advance. Like what intrigues them? If there was a specialization of some sort, what would it be? Is it audio? Is it video? Is it, whatever it is? If it could just be.
Well, those are the only two in AV, Mark.
Yeah,
so
they are the only two. But we know, like, there's
control,
there's control, there's infrastructure, so there's all that stuff. Yeah, so all that's fair game, and we can specialize in all those pieces.
So on the training side of things, it's interesting you bring that up. Do you guys all deal with an acknowledged and explicit dedicated time in someone's professional, position description for training to say, hey, 10% of your time, 8% of your time, something, I want you to put this towards training, whatever that might be, whether it's formal or informal. But
historically, there's been 1 week in June that happens where people, a subsect of our staff will fly to either Florida and or Nevada and do some training. So when that happens, yeah, there's a good chunk of a week.
There's a subset of that staff who oversleeps every morning and misses all those classes.
Right. I've been in both segments of those subsets.
And there's a subset of that subset who forgot to make hotel reservations.
And there's a subset
and they get there and they try to find their hotel after the fact.
That may have overslept and also been the one training.
Yeah. So, the training, the people that work in AV at WKU aren't necessarily completely passionate about AV. I'm the only one out of the 12 people that I mentioned earlier, me being one of the 12, that have ever gone to Infocom. And so it's, everybody's got their role, and it's more just they have a job within IT at the university rather than I love AV, I want to work in AV. Tomorrow, one of these people might take another job doing desktop support in Nashville, answering phones. Who knows? So it's a different dynamic that we have too that we're dealing with because we support so many different software components in the room.
Like you guys deal with a lot of shared services where someone may be helping out for their expertise in your AV project, but for them it's just another IT role.
Yeah, so looking through the 3 or 4 pages of tickets that this group has right now, Zoom issue, on the media, signage problem, locked out, Zoom locked out, account Zoom locked out. So it's
you guys are using Zoom. It sounds like you guys use Zoom.
We're using Zoom
a little
bit.
Zoom issues going on there.
Zoom issues, so Zoom issues, they're kind of deal with all those things rather than, oh man, why is this video signal blinking on this projector? Those kind of things go to the engineering side.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Zoom's a good example. Is Zoom an IT issue or is Zoom an AV issue? Or
it depends on the problem, I guess.
Yeah, there you go. It depends.
So
So then you need to have that specialization of people who can get in there and triage and determine, no, the problem's not with the camera. The problem's with Zoom itself. And then that's a different person because you got to get the Zoom admins involved to look at that. And then, so in that sense, WKU is perfectly set up because you've got this wide-ranging team of different roles and they know who to contact when that comes up.
Exactly. And so, kind of going back to our director, we have communications engineer, which is, if we have a network engineer, so that's the network. Then we have the lead systems engineer for systems. That's like the databases and the servers and all that crap. Zoom server, you don't have a Zoom server, media site server, those kind of things. And then it's AV. And then we have the cabling group. So we all share resources. My job role is an AV design engineer, can AutoCAD and StarDraw a lot. So guess what I started getting put on my shoulders? For all capital construction projects, I'm the one who pieces together all the CAD. So if we have a dorm and there's 9 stories and there's no AV, I've got to deal with copy and pasting data all over the place and making sure the data counts are right and coming up with a standard set of drawings for IT. So there's a lot of there's a main role and then there's, you got this other shit over here you got to do too,
15% other duties as assigned.
Exactly. And that's completely fine. So that's why it's so hard to determine, metrics, hard and fast metrics for staffing for your spaces per university. It's a good guide, but it depends what your culture at the university does. If you're not supporting computers, you need that less many people. Right.
So you raise a good point there. Early on, we were talking about who handles computers in our group, and I think all of us. And I will say, I'll preface this by saying my first role in AV was so I did before I got into AV, I was doing IT, I was doing PC deployment, sysadmin work, server work, that sort of thing. And the AV group needed someone to deploy all their computers, and so when I took that job. At the same institution, so I just moved to a different building. But now all of a sudden I'm deploying all the computers in the computer labs and the classrooms and that sort of thing, automating all those processes. This is all in the early to mid 2000s. And I kind of got into the AV side of things. But I will say, so somebody who deployed a bunch of computers and was really good at doing that entirely remotely, didn't have to touch anything because you shouldn't have to. If you're out there physically touching computers and you're deploying it, you're doing it wrong. Anyway, barring hardware failure or someone leaving them unplugged. But so specifically with computers in classrooms and conference rooms and things like that, are we all responsible for those computers, or is that a different group on campus? Because I think my opinion is that is a real time sink if you're also having to build and deploy the computers.
Yeah, we don't build them. We get another department within IT to build the image, and then we deploy the images and support the images is the way I understand it. Luckily, the engineering group has nothing to do with that, and that falls all on support.
We're a blend. We have a group that does campus labs and that stuff, and then we do the general purpose, like computers in a space, right? So that falls on our group, and we have one person who kind of does and sees that role and is the leader and kind of does all that imaging and does that. And we'll work primarily with the students, and then from time to time we'll have professional staff members come in and assist with that as well.
Yeah, we're kind of in the same boat that we don't have to build the image. We coordinate with the team that builds the image, and then they push the image. And luckily that same PM type role helps to facilitate all of that. But we are responsible for every PC in the classroom or learning space across campus. So that, and it is.
So let me ask you this, Larry. If you have a computer, so who manages your computer labs? The same people?
We do now. Yeah, that just happened recently.
Labs we do not. Labs is a
Larry,
different group.
Yeah, Larry personally manages the labs.
Yeah.
Good God.
From his phone.
So what's interesting for us, you walk into a computer lab space that's used as a classroom with AV. You'll have us going, well, we support this one computer, but you got to call somebody else for those 25. And it's like weird
that's
shit
the
like
way
that.
we were. And I'm kind of glad they just went ahead and made this switch, because it was real difficult for those 25 to be imaged and the one in the instructor station not to be exactly the same.
Because they all have to have the same software, right?
Yeah, I'd rather just, if these are supposed to be the same, let's just put them all under the same umbrella and make sure they all work.
So I will say, as somebody who did PC deployment, that's the first thing I would cut loose if I had the opportunity from a classroom and AV standpoint, because I find it somewhat I find the dichotomy interesting that so much of what we do now in a classroom or conference room is driven through the PC. So you need to make sure that works, because that's where so much of that kind of conversion happens there. But that's the one appliance I don't really care about, because I know I can replace it at a moment's notice with something else, and get that working. So I'm just as happy to hand that off to somebody else, with the caveat, because I see Larry shaking his head, with the caveat of that team also needs to be responsible for configuring it correctly.
I was just going to say that configuration has, how many times have you been burned by not being the group that's deployed the computer because of that configuration? Or
Which is why they change a driver, they change something, and all of a sudden you got classrooms across campus that are dead. That scares me.
And that's the reason why, like I said, this AV group, years ago when I first started doing AV stuff, they wanted someone to do their own computers, because the lab guys were doing computers, and A, they were stretched real thin, and B, they would just, they'd deploy it and drop it off, and there it is, and why is it not working, sort of thing. So I like to share this was an issue at UMKC, and I like to share my anecdote there of they would push routine updates.
Because Jamie's not here, you're just going to throw him under the bus.
Bash on him. Throw Jamie under the bus.
So Jamie would remember this story, but they would, the PC guys, it was a different group. They would bring the PC in, we would hook it up, all sorts of things. But it was that last little bit, that configuration, that was never quite right. And this one building we were doing was the first all digital building. So all the connections coming off the computer were USB, and it was DisplayPort to HDMI, but it was all digital, 2011, 12, somewhere in there. But they were still using the older model of using the image was designed to push audio out the headphone jack and things like that. So it would kept breaking, and we would fix it. And then they would come through and push updates again on Sunday nights, because there'd be security patches and things, and that would break it again. And we went round and round and round for the first couple of weeks of this. And like I said, this building was new, so it was a bit of an outlier. But after effectively every Monday morning, every week, the computer's being broken. And by that time, and I will say the guys who did the deployment were really good to work with as far as making those fixes, and they could make those fixes really quickly. They'd make that noise while they did it too. But finally, it got to be a little annoying that it kept happening week after week after week. So finally, instead of putting in one ticket, hey, this happened again in the building, I put in a ticket for every single computer affected. And the help desk manager calls and says, why are there 40 identical tickets in here? I said, because you broke 40. Broke 40 computers. They're like, no, it's one. That's one issue. I said, no, that's 40 issues. So that problem stopped right there. It never happened.
I agree.
Again,
that is 40 issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they saw it as one issue 40 times. I said, no, it's 40 issues one time. But that did figure out that configuration. So they started paying very close attention. And we actually, at that point, it got escalated to the point of, all right, let's work with our deployment team. What post-config scripts, for those of you doing this, what post-config scripts need to run to actually set the right parameters for these devices in these spaces, and then we had a good model working forward. And for years afterwards, it was not a problem. So we had that.
Let's back up a little bit. So Chris brought up a good point that I want to highlight here. For those of you listening that work in IT at your higher ed institution, and you have a problem in IT, put in a ticket with IT. That sounds redundant, but you'd be amazed how shit gets resolved so quickly. Oh, an IT person put in a ticket for IT and they need help. So yeah.
Well, because it's a metric, they have to solve that and close that ticket.
It's in front of other people's faces, and that means one of our employees doesn't understand something about IT. Kind of, yeah.
Well, especially once it starts affecting academic spaces, they pay a lot of attention to that. So when they functionally broke, 40 computers for academic use, it became an issue. So.
Speaking of academic spaces a little bit, this is a weird tangent, but it deals, I think, with what we're talking about. As I was thinking about this topic today, I got to thinking, how many universities would expect their network admin to pull cable, to set up the closets, to design the network, and to program the switches?
Pull cable?
I see where you're going, Larry. This is a good point. It's a really good point.
Since AV is becoming more and more part of the IT culture, yet most of our universities consider the AV staff to be one. Everyone is responsible
climbers
for
and hammer
every
swingers.
part of those. Everyone does every aspect of the job, or at least that's their ideal. It's just interesting how separate the two groups are at this point.
I would say we are more formed like the rest of IT. Everybody's got their little niche, and if you need help with something, then you call that department and they help you.
So you're saying if you got a problem, I'll solve it. Check out the beat while the DJ revolves it.
That's right. So it's, but I get what you're saying. And that's
a really good example. I like that.
Yeah, that's what baffles me, because I look at these job descriptions all the time online for higher ed jobs, and they're wanting AV people. And I sit there and think, my God, I don't want to do 5 different things. I wouldn't be good at any of them. If that's your main role. Everybody's got to help everybody out at some point. I get that. But to have your main role to be programming, design engineer, and project manager, it's a little ridiculous.
Well, I think there's kind of like the two sides of that. There's folks who believe that they're more closely aligned with the facilities group. Then there's those who find that they may be closer aligned to the IT proper group. And so we all know that it's a blend of those two things. But when you're looking at an admin
library,
or God help the ones that are in the library,
still out there.
Yeah, I know it's out there, but so it really, like, where does the Plinko chip start? Right, when you drop that down, what is the initial kind of channel that it falls into, and usually the admin somewhere at the very top makes that decision, like, oh no, you're going to be facilities shop, or no, you're going to be under the umbrella of IT.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen groups organized under the library, because that's where the media services group came from. They were pushing film strips and VCRs around campus, and so that made sense. That's AV, and I've seen them come out of facilities and physical plant because, hey, well, you're doing it with electronics and you're building systems, so that's kind of like electricians and electronics and electronic shops.
We're all plumbers.
It's all pipes. And then now we're seeing it in IT, which is probably arguably where it belongs. Though, as we've discussed here in the last 45 minutes or so, that we're kind of all over the place, and we're really touching a lot of different parts of IT. So we kind of straddle that whole organization, or
really
at least
do.
like. In Justin's case, you kind of pull from different parts of that organization depending on what needs to be done at the time. So it's an interesting kind of way to think about that. So I think probably the next step, and Justin, you mentioned it a minute ago, when you look at some of these job descriptions out there, how do those actually lay out? So let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to look at some actual job descriptions and see, how is this institution or this organization structured, and what's this job actually kind of look like? So we'll be right back.
And it says it's recording.
All right. So for our final segment today, we're going to continue our discussion of AV staffing, IT staffing at universities, and kind of what that should look like. And we were just describing that a lot of these positions, if you were to read the descriptions, it'd be hard to tell. What's this role really doing? Is it a catch-all that they've been using the same state classified boilerplate from HR for 40 years and it's drastically out of date, or is it just written really vaguely by someone who's 4 layers removed from the actual position and doesn't know what this role should be doing? So Justin and Larry have both found examples of these job descriptions, and we've anonymized them a little bit so you can't tell quite where they're from. So Justin, why don't you tell us about the one you found, and let's hear what's going on there.
So I don't think mine is doing as much as Larry's is doing, but we'll see. So mine's a little interesting. It's more of a support.
Let's actually warn somebody. Some of these may make you laugh when we get there. Yeah. So we may not be giving you the best information you may be seeking, but just fair warning on this segment.
And these are more of like red flags to watch out for while you're job searching in the AV world,
exactly,
right? Especially
exactly.
in higher ed. So the job summary real quick. I'm just going to read that verbatim. Supports and installs AV equipment to ensure support of classrooms and other AV-enabled spaces, provides audiovisual systems related to services and solutions such as AV systems for classrooms, instruction, learning, meeting, and event spaces, and digital signage. So that's a little bit of
That doesn't sound that bad. That sounds like
it's not bad.
Stuff.
I don't know what the salary range is here yet, but you got to have a high school diploma. So that's
enough.
the only qualification for that. 2 years of related AV experience or IT experience, either or. So you could work in IT, and that's enough experience to jump into this job. Okay.
Which I would agree with. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, maybe not, depending. Preferred qualifications. Here's where it gets a little interesting. Extron AV associate. Okay, really? But that's fine. I get it. Comma, Avixa Infocom certification, comma, certified technical specialist. So that's all kind of weird and wrong there. They don't understand even what a CTS is and maybe even who gives it. That's fine.
Well, there's a typo in it, but yeah.
So going through all of this stuff, they got to diagnose tickets. They got all AV spaces across the whole university, meaning more than classrooms. So that's concerning. Are you one person? Are you a team of people? Not really sure because it doesn't really explain that. You probably have to dig in and do some research. The one thing that stands out to me about this, there is no mention about being able to read or understand prints and schematics. It's like this person is going to just collect a bunch of technology and cart it out to a classroom or a space and be able to figure out how to rack it up and make it work all by himself or herself.
That's a good point. I think you'd be surprised I think you'd be surprised at the number of, and I'll say it, the number of AV technicians who cannot properly read a schematic.
I think that's one of those implied skills that's never
it's
clearly called out. Yeah, it's just like,
no, you're right. That's
listed.
It's absolutely implied, and you're right. That should be listed, but I think everyone just assumes.
So it's not. They also have to be able to work on multiplexers, which I thought was interesting.
That's interesting. Was that CTS?
So that says it right there. It's like a multiplexer.
Was the CTS a preferred, or was that a?
That's preferred. Oh, and if you have to obtain, let me read this verbatim, or must obtain within 1 year. So which one? Do they need to attain the Extron AV Associate or the Avixa certification or the Certified Technical Specialist thing?
All of them in 1 year.
Well, yeah, it sounds like my guess is on that they gave, here's some certs that we'd like this person to have, and the HR person wrote it in there not knowing which one's which, so it got
because
weird,
they listed Avixa certification and then separately listed a certified technical
I will
specialist.
also say a lot of people, even if they don't use Extron, a lot of people use that Extron Associate certification as kind of like a mini CTS, and it's actually
it's
a really
not a
solid
bad cert.
It's a really solid cert. So now
I've got it. I don't even remember it.
Yeah, so I will say to be fair, Extron's does have a bit of sales stuff in there because hey, it's their cert, they developed it. However, for like general intro, like if I hired a brand new tech who, like you said, Justin, maybe somebody just came over from IT. This guy was doing computers for 2 years, and we need him to come work in AV now. I'd have him do that cert in the first month, and it would like help immediately.
We've been giving the students the AV tech. The Avixa AV Tech, that's a solid one for people who don't know anything. Like just
recognized AV technician.
That is a good way to roll. Like that's a fair one. And I was going to bring
do that with our students.
Yeah, exactly. The students. Do you think it's fair going back to that implicit thing, like the reading schematics, if that's part of the CTS, which a big chunk of that is, there's a lot of that in there. Do you need to clearly spell it out? Would they be better served just saying must have CTS, and then you don't have to get into all the nitty gritty, and you just assume that if you have the CTS, you have the background skill set?
Well, what I'm looking at this job description as, I don't want somebody coming straight out of Best Buy going, yeah, I installed a home theater yesterday, and doesn't even know what a schematic or a print is.
But
like,
I think
at least be familiar, at least list it like as a preferred skill. Right? Not a required skill.
No, I would agree that they use multiplexer in there. So they're using old language from old descriptions.
Yeah.
I would agree. The indication to me in that one is you said they need to have at least, a high school diploma and 2 years experience. That says to me that in the AV world, that's still kind of an entry level, like one step above the guy who's just helping carry your ladder.
And that's a
position.
lot for that person to be doing. It almost looks like a leadership role, but it may not be. It may be a part of a bigger team. I don't know.
I think that's going to be your line support and install technician position.
Like not a manager, but a leadership role, as in I'm the only person doing this gig. And then somebody else is doing something else over there, which
we don't know what size school
hell.
this is. So yeah, you could be that guy and one other guy doing computers at a smaller school, and that's it. At which point, that's scary. But I'm assuming the way that reads that there's probably a larger team of 3 or 4 people, and this is a new person.
Maybe so.
Hiring. That's my guess.
I mean, it's not far off for entry level. I mean, it sounds like to me they're looking for the fresh out of college, maybe has a few years out, that is involved with like their church, does some AV stuff on the side, or somebody who's been in a band for a long time and has some skill sets around.
Yeah,
like set up. That's what this sounds like to me.
So this is one of those that could be a good job. It's just I feel a poorly wrote job description of what they're actually looking for.
I think we would all agree that it's missing what it should be. Now, speaking of that, I noticed it did not say anything about programming.
No,
Larry,
thank God.
Larry, you said you found one that they want all sorts of programming. So
yeah,
what did you find out there?
So before we go into that, though, I want to say, so just I want to get by show of hands so everybody can see it. Would you rather hire somebody at the more advanced side or bring somebody in green? I like younger
It depends
staff.
on the person.
It depends.
I'd rather bring them in
person.
green, and I'd rather grow a technician or a specialist than try to.
Well, that's my take.
I would want my programmer at least programming something in his life before he came on site and started programming Crestron. At least, did you take one programming class in college?
If I was hiring a programmer, I would want somebody who knows how.
So it
General
depends.
tech.
Yeah.
All right. So Larry, what do you got?
Okay, I think Justin found one that might be a good job. The one I found kind of scares me right now, and so, but I see these type of listings all the time in the AV world, and I just kind of want to raise some red flags to people who are writing these job descriptions to narrow down what it is you actually want, because you're more likely to find it then. So I have anonymized this like crazy. This position is responsible for designing, programming, installing, testing, and maintenance of AV systems across the campus and satellite locations. They monitor the system performance and resolves related problems. That, to me, summarized says you are strategic planning, designing, project managing, installing, programming, commissioning, and handling classroom emergencies. When we go down to the required and preferred qualifications, they only want 1 year of experience, which is good. But in that 1 year of experience, they want experience with video conferencing systems, experience with lecture capture, experience with AMX, Crestron, and Extron programming, and basic networking experience.
It's a busy year.
And yeah, now, to be fair, they would also prefer that person have their master's degree, which might eliminate some of the needed experience and all that. But when you list the salary range, and the salary range is from 50 grand to 55 grand, you're going to have a hard time finding.
Thank God you got that master's. Thank God you have that master's.
Yeah. And this is what I feel like a lot of the higher ed positions are. And this position was listed that they are on a team, so they're not the only one. It's not a small university. But if you were to apply for this job, I have no idea like what level of person they're expecting, because their qualifications don't match their salary range at all.
So let me wear my administrator's hat here for a moment. When hiring folks, we do this exercise where we want to cast a big net, right? And sometimes the approach is, let's just put the wish list on here and let's just hope that a unicorn does show up. Maybe we can just fish with the proper unicorn bait and we get that person, knowing full well we're probably only going to get 2/3 of it. So we're going to have to kind of give and take. So I can see it from like the higher level, like, cool, what do you want? Put it on the list. I only have this much budget, but if you can get it, good luck.
Yeah, and it may very well have been that kind of we mentioned before in the one that Justin had, where somebody sent their requirements to HR and they dropped it into their template and did all that. And so someone may have done the same thing. They went and asked, hey, Mark, we're going to be hiring a new guy. What do you want? Justin, what do you want? Larry, what do you want? And they dropped all those things in there and then sent it off to HR, who then wrote this. And now they're looking for this unicorn with a master's degree in computer science with only 1 year experience.
Doesn't that scare you off as a person looking for a job? It does me. Like if I was looking for a job,
Depends how hungry you are. If you're hungry.
It would concern me if I didn't know that the university had a clear understanding of what their needs were. Because I understand the wide net, because it's hard to find quality people. You want to keep your own guys. You want to develop within, because when you start searching from other places, it's difficult. But obviously there was a role to fill, and I'm curious like what that role actually was.
But it'd be nice to be on that committee to hear some of these people who identify themselves as unicorns, to find out what it is they actually are interested in.
Yeah, that would. It's
because sometimes you find that those people that's like, oh, well, I applied, I didn't have all this, but when you talk to them, you're like, you know what, this is a solid person that is like hungry, and maybe he may not have all the programming skills, but you know what, for some reason he did an internship with a low voltage company and is amazing at pulling cable, and so you may be able to bend that, and then you just move some of that other stuff over to a different position you hire in the future, and just kind of keep moving forward.
One of the best qualities out there is being teachable, right?
Yeah, that advantage of being able to hire somebody and kind of grow them into the role you want. And so you may say, okay, I really want someone who can do all these 8 things. This particular person can do 6 of them really well, so we can train them up on the other 2. And that that might work well enough for a position like that. So,
and so in looking at these positions, and we've all been on committees hiring folks, and I always try to do my best to get a grasp on the people when I said, like, how do you read this position? Is this the end all be all only things you are going to do in your position? Or do you read this as the starting point for success for your position? And you can tell a lot of people, they're like, okay, no, I want to only work within the confines of what's written in this PD. Or some people are like, okay, cool, if I do this, that's my bare minimum, and I can move on and do other things and grow. So you can use them kind of in both ways to kind of get a good judgment on kind of the quality of staff you're going to potentially have.
Or does just one of the items listed there, start eating up 80% of your time, and the other 7 items are, you help out with those, but your specialization is really this one thing that you're doing. That happens a lot.
Which is how it usually works anyway.
Yeah. If you have a good cross-trained staff, that's kind of, I think, how things would break down.
As you read it, for folks that are playing along at home, and you have these position descriptions, look for the weird thing on the bottom. It's like 5 or 10% like oddball things, and you're like, that sounds weird. If you don't absolutely love that oddball thing, that's the thing you're going to do the most in that job.
Well, yeah, and to that, I would say also look for the ones that specifically and explicitly call out time for training and professional development too, because I work places where that's not called out, and it is absolutely not given to the general staff as time to do that stuff. And the expectation is go do that at home, and I'm like, that's not something they should be doing at home. That's something they should be doing during the work day. To build their skill set, because it only makes builds better staff, better experts. So
I've seen your calendar, Chris, with all that training time on there when you were around. I know you take it seriously.
No shit. That's how you get going. All right.
He puts training time on his calendar, then goes takes a nap in the back. Nap time.
Dude, don't tell people.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a very wide-ranging and truly all over the place discussion, so I think we've managed to go off the rails quite a bit here. As we talked about early on, we don't have a hard number that we can use. If you have X number of spaces, you need Y number of staff, because it becomes very messy very quickly depending on your situation and your scenario. So if those of you who are were hoping that we would settle that once and for all, sorry, it didn't happen. But you can use my numbers 25 and 37. Use those two numbers.
We'll let them fight it out on Twitter. We'll post something up there asking what that sweet spot number is, and you guys can play along and see what it comes up, and maybe we'll read the consensus next time, and we'll kind of see what people described.
That said, I can see that the recording tape over there is running right down to the spool, so we're almost out of medium, and we're going to have to call it here, and we will see you guys next time.
Later.
Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV SuperFriends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.